Hi, everyone. It was a long time ago when I worked in Africa. I think it was in 2012. I worked as a liaison officer for UN Peacekeeping Mission in South Sudan. Feeling nostalgia, state-based conflict. The word might be not familiar with you, but this is today's topic. Keep learning and stay engaged.
Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive into something a little bit heavy, but honestly super important.
Lay it on me.
We're going to be talking about state-based conflicts.
Okay.
You know, all those clashes that you see constantly in the headlines?
Right.
What they mean for the world and what they mean for you?
Yeah.
It's easy to feel disconnected from these things
Sure.
when they seem so far away. But trust me, the ripples reach us all.
It's true. What I think is fascinating about this topic is we're not just looking at the what of these conflicts.
Right.
But also the why.
The why.
What are the root causes? Why are they happening more frequently now? And how do these seemingly distant battles impact global security?
Yeah.
And even, your daily life?
Right, because it's not just about who's fighting who.
Right.
It's about the larger forces at play.
Totally.
And speaking of forces, one stat really blew my mind.
Oh.
2023 saw the highest number of state-based conflicts since 1946.
Wow.
That's not a typo, folks.
Yeah.
We're talking a peak not seen in almost 80 years.
That's a sobering statistic. And it really reflects, I think, a trend of rising violence since the end of the Cold War.
Okay.
While large-scale interstate wars have become less common, we are seeing this surge in intrastate conflicts, often with multiple actors involved.
Yeah.
You think about rebel groups,
Right.
militias, even external forces with their own agendas.
Yeah.
This complexity just makes these conflicts incredibly difficult to contain and resolve.
Okay, so more conflicts, more complexity.
Right.
That already sounds like a recipe for trouble.
Yeah.
But what does this actually look like on the ground?
Sure.
Can you give us a sense of the scale of this issue?
Yeah, so in 2023 alone, there were 59 active state-based conflicts happening around the world,
Wow.
resulting in over 170,700 conflict-related fatalities.
Oh my gosh.
To put that in perspective, that's like losing the entire population of a mid-sized city every year due to conflict.
It's almost impossible to wrap your head around numbers that big.
Yeah.
And are these conflicts concentrated in certain regions, or is it a truly global issue?
That's a good question. Unfortunately, the burden of conflict falls disproportionately on certain regions.
Okay.
Africa, for instance, is the most conflict affected, with 28 start-based conflicts in 2023.
Wow.
It's a complex web of factors driving these conflicts. Poverty, inequality, weak governance, climate change,
Okay.
the list goes on.
It's heartbreaking to think about the human cost, the lives lost, the families torn apart.
Yeah.
And you mentioned this idea of a ripple effect.
Right.
How these conflicts, even if they're happening far away, can impact us all.
Absolutely. Take the Russia-Ukraine war, for example.
Okay.
While the immediate impact is felt most acutely in the region,
Sure.
the conflict has sent shockwaves through global energy markets, disrupted supply chains,
Yeah.
and contributed to food insecurity, particularly in countries that relied on Ukrainian grain exports.
But that spike in grocery prices I've been seeing, that could be connected to a war happening thousands of miles away.
Potentially.
It's wild how interconnected everything is.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And what about the impact on things like cybersecurity?
Sure.
We hear a lot about that in the news these days.
Cybersecurity is a major concern in this interconnected world for sure.
Okay.
State and non-state actors can launch cyber attacks to disrupt critical infrastructure, spread misinformation, or even try to influence elections in other countries.
Wow.
It's a whole new dimension of conflict that adds to the instability.
So we've got real-world impacts on economies, food security, even our digital lives.
It's a lot to think about.
But let's zoom in on some specific conflicts to really understand the dynamics at play. I know we have 3 case studies to cover today.
Okay.
The Russia-Ukraine war, the Israel-Hamas conflict, and the civil war in Sudan. Let's start with Ukraine. You mentioned it briefly, but can we dig a little deeper into how this conflict has reshaped the global security landscape?
Sure. The Russia-Ukraine war is a stark reminder of how quickly a regional conflict can escalate and have global consequences. As Richard Gowan, a SITREP analyst, aptly put it, the war has reshaped the global security landscape. highlighting the fragility of international order.
Okay, but reshape the landscape. What does that actually mean?
Well, for one, it's reignited old Cold War anxieties,
Uh-huh.
leading to increased military spending and a renewed focus on traditional defense alliances.
Okay.
The war has also exposed the limitations of international institutions in preventing or effectively responding to large-scale aggression.
Right.
It's forced countries to rethink their strategic alliances and reevaluate their own security vulnerabilities.
So it's not just about the fighting in Ukraine. It's about the global ripple effects.
Right.
The sense of uncertainty, the reshuffling of power dynamics. It's almost like everyone's on edge, waiting to see what happens next.
That's a good way to put it. The war has created this climate of uncertainty and distrust, making it harder to address other pressing global challenges like climate change or pandemics.
Right.
It's a stark reminder that security is interconnected. A conflict in one part of the world can have far-reaching consequences for us all.
This brings us to our next case study, the Israel-Hamas conflict.
Right.
This conflict has been going on for decades, but the recent escalation in violence is deeply concerning.
For sure.
Can you give us a sense of the human toll and the challenges of achieving a lasting peace in this region?
The Israel-Hamas conflict is a tragic illustration of how deeply entrenched historical grievances, political deadlock, and a lack of trust can fuel cycles of violence.
Yeah.
The recent escalation in October 2023 led to a devastating loss of life, with over 23,000 people killed in Gaza alone in just 3 months.
Those numbers are just staggering.
Yeah.
And it seems like every time there's a glimmer of hope for peace, something happens to reignite the conflict.
Right.
Why is it so difficult to find a lasting solution in this region?
It's a complex web of factors.
Yeah.
You have competing claims to land and resources, deep-seated historical trauma on both sides,
Right.
and the involvement of external actors with their own interests.
And we're seeing that play out with the Houthi rebels in Yemen targeting commercial shipping in the Red Sea, which further destabilizes the region and impacts vital trade routes.
Right.
It feels like one conflict spills over into another, creating a domino effect of instability.
Exactly. As Siri Restad, a research director at PRIO, pointed out, the Israel-Hamas conflict is a reminder of how quickly these conflicts can escalate and draw in regional and global actors.
Wow.
The involvement of external powers, often with competing agendas, can further complicate peace efforts and prolong the suffering.
It's like a tangled knot that gets tighter and tighter with every new development.
Yeah.
And speaking of complex situations, our final case study takes us to Sudan, where a civil war erupted in April 2023.
Okay.
This conflict is perhaps less well known than the others, but it's equally devastating in its impact. Can you tell us more about what's happening in Sudan and why it matters for global security?
I'd be happy to. The conflict in Sudan is a tragic example of how internal divisions and power struggles can erupt into widespread violence with devastating consequences for civilians. In just a matter of months, millions have been displaced, thousands killed, and the country has plunged into a humanitarian crisis.
It's hard to believe this is happening in the 21st century. What makes the situation in Sudan particularly alarming is that it's not just contained within its borders. The conflict is spilling over into the Sahel region, a vast and already fragile area, struggling with poverty, drought, and extremism.
The Sahel is a prime example of how conflict in one country can destabilize an entire region. The influx of refugees from Sudan is straining resources and exacerbating existing tensions. We're seeing a rise in cross-border crime, the spread of weapons, and increased competition for scarce resources like water and grazing land.
So it's like a wound that keeps getting infected, spreading the damage further and further. And you mentioned something earlier about external actors getting involved in Sudan. Can you elaborate on that?
Unfortunately, Sudan has become a proxy battleground for various international actors. You have Russia, for instance, reportedly supporting the Rapid Support Forces, a paramilitary group involved in the conflict through its Wagner Group mercenaries. On the other hand, you have Western countries expressing concern about the conflict's impact on regional stability and calling for a peaceful resolution.
It's a stark reminder that these conflicts are rarely isolated incidents. They often become entangled with larger geopolitical rivalries, adding another layer of complexity and making it even harder to find a path to peace.
Precisely. The involvement of external powers can prolong conflicts, fuel arms races, and hinder peace negotiations. It's like adding fuel to an already raging fire.
So we've explored these conflicts, the human toll, the geopolitical chess game, the ripple effects across economies, supply chains, and even cyberspace. It's a lot to take in, and honestly, it can feel pretty overwhelming. But I think it's important to step back and ask, why should we care? I mean, these conflicts are happening far away. How do they directly impact our lives?
That's a valid question, and it's easy to feel disconnected when these events seem so distant. But the reality is, we live in an interconnected world, and these conflicts, no matter how geographically remote, have a ripple effect that touches us all.
Okay, I'm listening. Spell it out for me. How do these conflicts directly impact our lives, even if we're not living in a war zone?
Think about your grocery bill. Remember those rising food prices we talked about earlier? Well, that's partly a consequence of these conflicts. The war in Ukraine, for example, disrupted global grain exports, leading to price hikes on staples like bread and pasta. The conflict in Sudan is exacerbating food insecurity in an already vulnerable region, potentially leading to further price increases and shortages.
Wow, I never made that connection before.
Yeah.
It's incredible how something happening thousands of miles away can directly impact what I'm paying for food at the supermarket.
It's a stark reminder that we're all part of a global system, and disruptions in one part of the world can be felt everywhere. And it's not just about food prices. Think about energy. The war in Ukraine has sent shock waves through global energy markets, leading to higher fuel costs and increased uncertainty about energy supplies.
So that jump in gas prices I've been grumbling about that's connected to the war in Ukraine, it's amazing how these seemingly distant events have tangible consequences for our daily lives.
Absolutely, and these are just the economic impacts. There are also security implications. Remember our discussion about cyber warfare. Increased global instability often leads to a rise in cyber attacks. State and non-state actors can use cyber attacks to target critical infrastructure, spread disinformation, or even disrupt elections.
It's a sobering thought that our digital lives, our banking systems, our communication networks are all potential targets in these conflicts. It feels like a new kind of battlefield, one that's invisible, but no less dangerous.
You're exactly right. We tend to think of conflict as happening on physical battlefields.
Yeah.
But in the 21st century, those battlefields have expanded to include cyberspace.
So we're not just talking about the direct human cost of war, but the ripple effects that touch every aspect of our lives, from our wallets to our digital security. It paints a pretty bleak picture, to be honest. But is there any hope? Are we just sitting ducks in this global game of conflict? Or is there anything we can do to prevent or mitigate these crises?
Well, it's easy to feel overwhelmed and powerless in the face of, these complex challenges.
Right.
But it's important to remember that we're not just passive bystanders. We can be active agents of change, both individually and collectively.
Okay, I like the sound of that.
Yeah.
But what can we actually do?
Right.
It all seems so big and systemic.
There are multiple levels at which we can address this. On a global scale, strengthening international institutions and promoting diplomacy is crucial.
Right.
We need effective mechanisms for conflict prevention, mediation, and peacekeeping. This means investing in diplomacy, strengthening international law, and holding those who violate international norms accountable.
So more cooperation, more dialogue, a stronger framework for resolving disputes peacefully. But what about those root causes we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
Things like poverty, inequality, weak governance.
Yeah.
Those feel like massive, deeply rooted problems.
You're right, they are. But addressing these underlying issues is crucial for building a more peaceful and stable world.
Okay.
Olvia Zahidi, managing director at the Wayne Economic Forum, emphasized this, saying multilateral solutions will be the only way to deal with future global risks.
Right.
Investing in sustainable development, promoting good governance, and ensuring equitable access to resources are all part of the solution.
It's like preventative medicine.
Exactly.
Addressing the root causes to prevent the disease of conflict from taking hold in the first place.
Yeah.
But what about when conflict has already erupted?
Right.
Is there anything we can do to stop the bleeding, so to speak?
When conflicts are active, promoting inclusive peace processes is vital.
Okay.
This means bringing all parties to the negotiating table, ensuring that women and marginalized groups are represented, and addressing the underlying grievances that fueled the conflict in the first place.
Right.
It's not just about stopping the fighting, it's about building a sustainable peace that addresses the root causes and prevents future violence.
That makes sense. It's about getting to the heart of the problem, understanding the different perspectives, and finding solutions that work for everyone.
Absolutely.
But what about on a more individual level? What can the average person do to contribute to a more peaceful world?
Even small actions can create a ripple effect.
Oh, wow, okay.
Staying informed about global events is crucial.
Yeah.
Educate yourself about the conflicts happening around the world, understand the complexities and challenge simplistic narratives, engage in respectful dialogue with others, even those who hold different views. Support organizations working to promote peace, human rights, and sustainable development.
So staying informed, having those tough conversations, and maybe donating to a reputable aid organization, those things can actually make a difference.
Absolutely. Every voice, every action contributes to shaping a more peaceful world. It's a collective effort, and each of us has a part to play. We might not be able to single-handedly stop a war,
Okay.
but we can contribute to a culture of peace, understanding, and empathy.
That's a powerful reminder. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of these challenges, but knowing that even small actions can have an impact is empowering.
Right.
It's a reminder that we're not just passive bystanders. We can be active participants in creating a better world.
Exactly. Peace is not a passive state. It's an active choice we make every single day. It's about how we treat each other, how we engage in dialogue, how we build bridges across divides. It starts with each of us in our own communities and our own interactions.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from the alarming statistics to the devastating human cost of state-based conflicts. We've explored the ripple effects that touch every aspect of our lives and grappled with the complexities of finding solutions. It's been a heavy but essential conversation.
I agree.
And remember, peace is not a spectator sport. It requires active engagement, critical thinking, and a willingness to work together to address the root causes of conflict. Keep exploring, stay curious, and remember, we're all in this together.
Indeed. The choices we make both individually and collectively shape the world we live in. Let's choose peace.